All right, guys. Hopefully that'll stop shaking. Um, Welcome to the last lecture of this class. Tomorrow I'll probably post something just in regards to kind of the test and maybe a little bit of just kind of getting you prepared for that. I posted a video for that similar to that, man, probably a few weeks ago. I don't know how long it was ago, but so watch that one as well. But this one will pertain to kind of it'll be really short, like 5 minutes. And I might even just make it a checklist. I'm not sure. But it'll just give you some information about the test, what you need to do. I will tell you this right now, and I've said this before, but your test is on May 18th, which is the Monday that's coming up right now. And it will be at 3 o'clock Central Time. So everybody should fall under that. You should be receiving e-tickets, I would think, tomorrow. Okay, if you haven't already received them. Somebody put in the comments in the class section on the Google Classroom page if you've received your e-tickets or not. But if you don't get one tomorrow, okay, I would probably say wait till Friday. But if you don't get one Friday, you need to email me, and I need to talk to Barb, and we'll just try to figure out what's going on. There's obviously a technical issue there. You should all receive an e-ticket, which will allow you access to this test. So, guys, today I will post this. It is the last mandatory. Well, today's a mandatory class. Technically, Friday is as well. I am taking attendance. I have been this whole time. I had a student ask like what the attendance is. You should be able to find that online somewhere, wherever you guys found attendance before that. Because the way I'm taking attendance is I take it from you guys by asking you those questions. And then I just send it to the main office. So hopefully you should, however the main office used to do attendance, like when we were actually at school, and if you were able to view that before, you should be able to view it now, because I assume they're doing the same thing. Before we get into risk analysis, which is it's an interesting module actually, but this is the last module of the chapter. Which means that, like I said, you guys are completely caught up. You guys have everything. We've talked about everything that you need. Does that mean that you shouldn't have been reading through these chapters? Of course you should be reading through. Your own form of studying is going to be far better than just listening to me. I think that you should be supplementing this with as much of your study technique as possible. Okay, especially with this being so kind of on your own at this point. But do what you can at this point. There's not as much time, unfortunately, as I'd like. But we're gonna at least have it to where you guys have seen all the information. We've talked about it all. We've gotten through these chapters, and I'm happy about that. Okay, I'm not happy about how the year ended up, obviously, but the coronavirus is a little out of our control, so things change. I hope you guys. It's ugly today, but yesterday was beautiful. I hope you guys are out enjoying this beautiful weather when we have it. Let's go ahead and pray, and then we'll talk, and you'll be done with these lectures. Lord God, I just bless this group. I thank you, Lord, so much for the few that do watch these videos. I ask, Lord, that they are an encouragement, that they help, that they enable, Lord, all the students to feel more confident in their knowledge of these topics. Lord, I pray that as the test approaches, that you give them wisdom, that you give them forethought, that you enable them, Lord, to have no technical issues, which is very much beyond their control, that you help them, Lord, to organize themselves well, to respond well to the questions, and do well on the test so that they can get that 3 or better and receive credit where credit is due. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. All right, so I wanted to talk about risk assessment, or risk analysis, which includes risk assessment. There's 2 types of risk assessment. One is qualitative and one is quantitative, and we talk about those 2 types actually when we do labs. We try to find qualitative data and we try to find quantitative data. So if you don't know what those terms mean, think about quality and quantity, okay? Maybe you've heard the saying quality over quantity or quantity over quality, depending on what you want. Let me give you an example of that. If you go to what's the restaurant? Like Ponderosa, I don't think those exist anymore. Golden Corral, okay, and you eat at the buffet. Maybe you guys have done that in the past at some point. I haven't eaten at one of those in, oh man, probably a decade. That would be an example of quantitative over qualitative. It would be an example of quantity over quality. A qualitative judgment or a risk assessment is one that usually judges risk based off of perception and is much less accurate. A quantitative assessment judges risk based off of actual data, and the following formula, which is down there at the bottom, says risk equals probability of being exposed to a hazard times the probability of being harmed if exposed. So, and when we talk about exposed to this hazard, what we're talking about is anything in the environment that can be potentially cause harm. So up there at the top, we kind of have that. So this is interesting because we do this every day. We use qualitative data a lot more than we use quantitative data in our everyday assessment of risk. And the reason we do that is because it's easier for us. Okay? We don't have usually hard figures. Quantitative data has to have actual data with it. Okay, it has to have hard figures, hard facts. And oftentimes we don't have that. Now, we have it with a quick, probably, search online. We can find a lot of that stuff. But people don't do that. They just use qualitative data to make their judgments of risk. Let me give you an example of that. You might drop a peanut on the floor, right? I don't know why you're eating peanuts or why you dropped one. You might say, okay, well, it touched the floor. There's no way I'm going to pick that up and eat it. Okay, or even put it towards my mouth. There's no way I'm going to do that. You base that assessment of risk. You say that that's too risky of a behavior. You base that assessment of risk off of a qualitative analysis. You judge that because it's on the floor and you perceive the floor to be dirty, the peanut is now dirty, and because of that, you cannot go about consuming that peanut. However, in the same breath, like while you're eating dinner, you might touch your phone 100 times, okay, or 3 or 4 times, whatever it might be. But you probably will touch your phone while you're eating dinner. You don't perceive that to be nearly as risky as picking up that peanut from the floor. But I would argue that if you looked up the actual data, your phone is probably a cesspool of pathogens. Okay, and that's because you touch it all the time, you sneeze on it, you cough on it, you have it out all the time, so it's exposed to a lot more pathogens than something that you have put away. So I would argue that quantitatively, your phone might be more of a risk to have out while eating than eating that peanut off the floor. Now, I don't have any data to back that up, but let me give you an example where I do have data. Okay, we as a society, and I do not want to get into any sort of debate, so maybe I shouldn't even talk about this, but I'm going to jump out on a limb here and talk a little bit about it. And it's okay if you have strong feelings towards this. I don't really, but if you have strong feelings towards this, it's fine. We as a society look at firearms, and a lot of people think that they should be completely outlawed. I don't know where you fall in that camp. I'm not going to necessarily tell you where I fall either, but a lot of people think that they should be 100% outlawed because they do harm to other people, and they absolutely do. There's no question about that. And there is, by the way, I want you to look on page 632 of your book. It really demonstrates this well with a little graphic there. But it does harm, okay? And I think the book, let me actually turn to that page because it tells you, it uses that one as an example. Bear with me for a moment. Yeah. So, let's see here. Firearm assault. There is, now, the reason that's always a talking point. It's a big deal, especially when there's a shooting or some sort of issue with a firearm. There's some sort of death caused by a firearm, and rightfully so. These are horrible events, and because of that, because these are so dramatized and presented by the media, we form sort of a qualitative idea of the risk of gun violence in our minds, and we say, okay, because of that risk, we should do something maybe drastic, like ban all firearms or ban certain firearms. And again, I'm not getting into the debate as if we should or if we shouldn't. Some firearms probably do need to be banned. Some firearms maybe don't. I don't know. That's up to you to decide. But if you look at the book, I think it's interesting is that we base that off of qualitative risk assessment, not quantitative risk assessment. Because if you look on that book, on the page rather, 632, it shows that firearm assault occurs in 1 in 370 people. Now that's way too high. I'm not downplaying that. That is a bad figure, even quantitatively. 1 in 370 people. That should not be the case. But the thing that fascinates me is the fact that heart disease and cancer affects 1 in 7 people. Okay, heart disease being the biggest factor there. So 1 in 370 versus 1 in 7. Okay, now why do I bring that up? Because those same people that might argue that we need to ban all firearms, they never talk about McDonald's. They never talk about Taco Bell. They never talk about the amount of red beef or red meat that we eat. If people are truly concerned with the lives of individuals, that's the stuff we really should be banning. That's what we should be focusing on. The things that cause heart disease. And trust me, I had a big steak last night. I'm not trying to sound hypocritical here. I don't necessarily care about heart disease as much as I should. But I'm just saying that I find it funny that we really focus on things that, while bad, that we ignore the elephant in the room. Because if we could somehow figure out a way to eradicate heart disease by eating a healthier diet, by shifting our mindset away from high amounts of protein and a lot more, good, clean carbohydrates, whole carbohydrates, and less refined sugars and less processed food, if we could shift our mindset to that and eat a more organic, natural, healthy diet, we would save way more people than if we did something like ban firearms. Okay, or what have you. Look at the chart and you'll see. So again, it's all about risk analysis, and oftentimes I think we let our qualitative sort of judgment surpass our quantitative judgment, and that is a dangerous thing to do. So, also the risk changes depending on your circumstances, and that's kind of down there at the bottom, that little formula. It says risk is the probability of being exposed to a hazard times the probability of being harmed if exposed. So if you eliminate the exposure, the chances of you being harmed goes down drastically. All right. So the fundamental rule, I guess, of risk assessment is this idea that if the risk of a rare event that has a high likelihood of causing harm can be equal to the risk of a common event that has a low likelihood of causing harm. So I want you guys to understand that flying, we'll just say, what's a good example? If you do something for a long period of time, like eat red meat 3 times a week, okay, that has a low likelihood of, it's more common than you think. Like I said, it's the number one cause of death. But it has a lower likelihood of causing you harm than something like spelunking, right, which is cave diving. It's going into caves and exploring them. So one might seem more dangerous than the other because one is more dangerous. Spelunking is the most dangerous human activity that you could almost do. And yet, both have the same likely outlier, or they have the same likely outcome. There's the word. They're both going to probably cause death in a similar fashion. If 1 in 7 people die of heart disease, I'm sure that it's probably even less likely that 1 in 7 spelunkers die by going into a cave. Okay, so again, it just depends on which two you're comparing. Risk acceptance, is the level of risk that can be tolerated. And here's the thing, that's very subjective. Some people might say that, I'm going to risk eating red meat because I like it and it's delicious, and I am willing to take my chances with heart disease. Some people might say I'm not going to put a firearm in my home because it might result in a accidental misfire and death. And so they have to figure out what their risk acceptance is for that particular environmental hazard. And by the way, we do that every day. Every time you guys get into a car, you guys realize you make a risk assessment. Okay, right now it's been raining. A risk assessment that is based off of qualitative data is me saying, okay, it's been raining. I'm still going to drive, first off, because I have to. But I'm going to slow down. That would be a good example of me doing something good to lower my risk. But you have to be able to make that assessment. People that say I'd rather drive than fly because it's safer, it's not, okay? You might perceive flight to be more dangerous because you're not in control, but you are much more likely, as I'm sure you guys have heard before, to die on the way to the airport than you are to die in the plane, okay? So how does the world handle risk, and how do they do it differently? Again, going back to the environmental sort of aspect of this, there are 80,000 regulated chemicals in the world, and they are not all regulated the same way. Okay, we regulate certain things more so than others, and we definitely don't regulate other things that some countries very strongly regulate. Okay, so there's two approaches. One is the innocent until proven guilty principle, which is probably the one that most manufacturers and most people in the United States adhere to. It's based on the belief that a potential hazard should not be considered a real hazard until the scientific data definitively demonstrates that it actually causes harm. This is the we'll do it now and we'll pay the price later sort of mindset. Now, there's some benefits to this, okay? If I told you that I had a cure for cancer, everybody would probably jump on board. I'm sure it'd be fast-tracked for approval. But if you found out later that like 10, 20 years later that it destroyed some part of the ecosystem of an environment just by being introduced to that environment, there might be some backlash at that point. Now, I still think human life is always going to be cherished more than the environment, so we'd probably still keep it, but still, that would be an example of figuring out the consequences later to our actions. Another good example of this is DDT. And I know I've used that example before. It's a very famous pesticide. But spraying DDT kills mosquitoes. It stops mosquitoes from biting you. Is that worth it if you were in an area where there is a lot of malaria that is spread by mosquitoes? I would argue yes. Okay, but at the same time, you're spraying a chemical in your body that is outlawed by the Stockholm Convention, which we're going to talk about here in a second. So, I mean, there's a risk assessment there. Is it worth not getting bit by mosquitoes and potentially exposing yourself to malaria or cholera? I don't know. That's something for you to decide. The other example of this is probably the better of the two, I would argue. This is the precautionary principle, which is based on the belief that a hazard is plausible but not yet certain. We should take actions to reduce or remove the hazard. This is the idea that if scientists say that this is going to cause an environmental issue, that we should automatically withdraw it from the market and try to come up with a replacement. Now, I want you to understand that the plausibility cannot be just speculation. It has to be based off of scientific fact or scientific analysis. This unfortunately allows for fewer chemicals to be distributed. Some of those chemicals can have a beneficial effect, so we're taking those away. However, they could also be harmful, so we're taking away that risk. This is like the cautious person's sort of dilemma. Do you want to delay the introduction of a new chemical that might be completely harmless and only do good for the population, or do you want to allow that to go through and then reap the benefits of that, but also the consequences of that later? Okay, so the Stockholm Convention, which was, I believe, in 2001. I gave the date when it was updated, but 2001 was, I think, when it was first done. It attempts to answer some of these questions. And what they did is they produced, in 2001, 12 chemicals that should be banned, reduced, or eventually eliminated from use. These were they were called the Dirty Dozen at the time because these are obviously chemicals that cause more harm than good. In 2017, they've increased that list to 32 chemicals that they believe should be reduced, banned, and taken out of use. The United States, while we have been to both of these conventions, both the original and the updated, and we actually even signed the agreement, we have yet, since 2001, which was 19 years ago, we have yet to ban or stop the use of any of these chemicals. And that's because we argue because we don't have the authority to do so, or we don't have the infrastructure or something like that. But this is one of those things where we show up, we sign the paper, but we don't actually do what is being said. For example, DDT was on that list of the first 12, and we still use DDT to this day. So we have some work to do in this sort of line. But I want you guys to think about risk assessment. And I hope that you're using quality risk assessment in your everyday life. This is one of those examples where that information, that principle of risk assessment and how we analyze risk through qualitative or quantitative data is something that you guys need to start implementing in your everyday life. I've been doing it with coronavirus, very much so. So and this is not necessarily a smart thing to do, but I have been going to lots of places that are open. I've been to Ace Hardware, Home Depot, Walmart 100 times. I've been to Schnucks 100 times. And I base that obviously I'm taking a risk when I go to those places that I'm going to be exposed to coronavirus. However, I base my assessment of that risk off of, one, the need for me to go to the store. Okay, and two, I try to base it not off of qualitative data where I'm just saying, I don't care, I'm better than the virus. But no, instead I base it off of quantitative data. And luckily, we live in a time where quantitative data is very readily available to us, especially with something that is so mainstream like information of the coronavirus right now. So I looked at the numbers, and I have been looking at the numbers, and I have seen from the very beginning that this virus, for whatever reason, seems to target a certain demographic much more so than a different demographic. Okay. In fact, from what I saw, 99.4% of people that receive or that get this virus, that contract it, survive. And of the 0.6% that don't survive, which again is tragic, I'm not downplaying their deaths at all. But of this 0.6 that don't survive, they are either immunodeficient, they have some sort of genetic disorder, some sort of immunity issue, or they are old. And this is not that's not me being ageist or anything. That's strictly data. I think the average age of death is like 84 for individuals that contract coronavirus. Again, that doesn't make it less drastic and less horrible. Not at all. But it does tell me things. It gives me quantitative data to make my risk assessment more viable. It says that at my age, I probably won't die from this. Okay, in fact, I have a 99.6% chance of surviving. And I would argue, based off my age, that it's even higher than that. I would say it's probably so far as 99.9% chance of surviving. And so do you, by the way, because of your age. Unless, of course, you have some sort of illness that I'm not aware of that causes an immunodeficiency. So I based my travels of going to all sorts of different places. I went to Aldi's yesterday. Okay, I based all of that off of quantitative and technically qualitative, but quantitative mainly data that says that I am not the demographic that this will kill. That doesn't mean that I won't get it. Okay, in fact, maybe I've already had it. I don't know. But again, it's using that understanding of risk assessment. I strongly encourage you guys. Anytime you're deciding if the risk is worth the reward, make sure that you take actual data into consideration. Don't just base it off of your own speculation, because your speculation is often wrong. Okay, and I include myself in that comment as well. My speculation is often wrong. All right. So that's all we had, guys. We are done. No more notes. Like I said, I will probably put out a checklist tomorrow for you. Make sure, guys, I'm going to post this. Make sure you sign in today for attendance as well. Listen, I know very few of you guys are going to watch this, and definitely very few are going to watch at the end. But I hope that you guys, if I don't say this, and I will, I'll say it in a post. But I hope you guys have a wonderful summer. I hope you do wonderful on this test. I hope you get exactly what you wanted. I hope you stay safe. Thank you for letting me be your teacher this year. Thank you for going with me on this journey, this first year of environmental science. I know it wasn't always smooth. Okay, I completely understand that. But thank you for coming with me along the bumpy ride. Okay, I think it was still good. I think we still learned quite a bit, even with all the craziness of this year. And I just appreciate you guys kind of being my first class. All right. Guys, stay safe, stay healthy. Have a wonderful summer. I hope it's great.